Hi everyone, I am Leah Hines, Executive Director for the Charleston Conference, and I'd like to welcome all of you to today's webcast, Sustainable Publishing for Digital Scholarship in the Humanities. This session is going to be moderated and led by Linnell White, who is with Michigan Publishing. She's Director of Sales, Marketing, and Outreach with University of Michigan, Michigan Publishing. And I'll turn it over to her in just a moment, but first a few housekeeping items. We're going to hold questions for all of our panelists and presenters to the end. If you'll look towards the bottom of your screen, there's a Q&A button. You can click that and enter the text of your question at any time during the presentation as questions come to mind. We would ask, since there are several presenters, if you have something that's directly related to one particular presenter, if you could just include their name, that would be very helpful as we go through questions at the end. Or if you have just a general question about the presentation as a whole, you can also put those with no indicator, and the whole panel can chime in. There is also an attendee chat function that's there. So if you have a question, if you're having issues with audio, after I do my opening here, I'm going to turn off my video and my microphone, but I'll be around to answer questions in the attendee chat. So you can raise your hand or you can ask a question there, and I'll help as soon as I can. With that, I have a quick poll question as people are coming in and getting settled. I would like to see, what kind of an attendee are you? If you could just select academic, medical, special, public librarian, other librarian, publisher, vendor, or consultant. And if it's something else, if it's other, just let us know in that attendee chat. We would be really happy to see that. You can also use the attendee chat to just say hello and your name, where you're coming in from, just so that we can say hello to one another. Other attendees can say hi to each other. I'm going to leave the poll open for just a moment here as these answers are still coming in, and then I'll display the results for that. Looks like mostly academic librarians right now. Around 54% academic librarians. One special librarian, a few publishers and vendors. So just take a few moments and answer. I see a couple of raised hands, and I'll get to that as soon as I finish the polling here. There is a delay and now no sound. Sandy, I will reply to that in just a moment. Hello from Winnipeg. Hello from Brandon University Library. Hi, everybody. All right, well, I'm going to end this opening poll here so you can see the results now. And with that, I will turn it over to Linnell to introduce our speakers and get started with the presentation. Thanks, everyone.
Well, thank you, everyone, for joining us today. It means a lot to us at Michigan Publishing, and also to our authors and our fellow librarian that you've chosen to attend our webinar today. We'd really like to engage you all in a discussion, and where our presentation is meant to encourage that between authors, librarians, and publishers. And we're hoping to really actively create and support this new enhanced ebook scholarship that we're seeing. We know now that there's lots of digital affordances in publishing and research, and there's a changing nature of scholarship is really emerging for us. And there's lots of value and impact that we're seeing within our communities, and we feel this merits open discussion. And so we'd like to also draw attention to the librarians who are joining us today to the different types of enhanced ebook titles that we're now seeing in the University of Michigan ebook collection, including our open access titles. And we've got a set of rich features on the Fulcrum platform that we feel really situates those features well. So with that, we'll go ahead and begin. Leah, if you could forward to the next slide. Right, so just a little bit of kind of context. So Michigan Publishing, in collaboration with the press and all of our library partners and authors, we really aim to be library friendly. This is one of our shared values that we hold dear to us. And the platform in which it sits is part of that. So something that we've been really exploring and understanding as we've been working in this space is that our authors are increasingly using digital tools. And so we actually firmly believe that every scholar is a digital scholar, has potential to be a digital scholar, certainly is working in the digital space at some point through publication. And while EBC, our University of Michigan Press ebook collection, is a collection of scholarly ebooks that we sell to libraries, we feel it's just more than that. In fact, we begin to look at it as an opportunity to engage with libraries and engage with authors in different ways, and increasingly publishers. So one of the things that we are really focused on is creating an ecosystem that supports authors, enabling them to achieve their goals, and a space where libraries, publishers, and readers can really invest in transparent, fair, and innovative solutions for digital scholarship. And we do this through a variety of ways, and I wanted just to call attention to some of the design principles that Fulcrum is built on, and you'll learn more about those as we go through the presentation today. And then one of them being discoverability, or accessibility, excuse me. And this is really about both content and technology, all the way from the way that we produce the content, the way we enrich it with alt text, making the content and display, screen reader friendly and also mobilely responsive. Also looking at discoverability, we've been working really hard to work through our library to create and enrich MARC records and KBART files, and really offering as much choice to libraries in terms of our aggregator partners, and also working through different channels to increase visibility and engagement with the works. Durability, this is a really a hard one to work on, something that the library community is really keen on though, and that is the long-term preservation of ebooks. And we've been working with AP Trust and Clocks and others to accomplish this, as well as putting our open source code on GitHub. And that's one of the aspects of Fulcrum being open source. And finally, flexibility, and that's really, for those of you who work in the library community, you've heard some Vera Fedora, and so this is the same stack as we have for our Deep Blue repository and many other institutions use. So I really wanted to situate us a little bit early on in the presentation that this is kind of the lens that we bring to the ecosystem in the scholarly publishing space. Next slide. Great. So just a quick overview of the collection itself. So currently it is scholarly titles published by the University of Michigan Press, and the authors that you'll hear from today are all part of this effort, part of this collection. So you'll get a little bit more understanding of what types of books we're looking at. But we've committed to at least 80 titles annually, and it's a growing corpus of over 1,000 works. And our main offering to libraries really centers around being library friendly, thinking through a lot of the ways that libraries like to license ebooks and provide access in terms of being unlimited, multi-user, DRM-free, a lot of which was kind of designed through Charlotte Principles and other communities. And also thinking through just the ebook itself, right? So what type of metadata and discovery do we need? What type of flexible downloading options like PDF or EPUB 3? Are folks interested in looking at print options? So just really thinking about the ebook itself and the features that kind of encompass it. And then of course we've thought a lot about the enriched experience in terms of the user journey, and also some of the things that you'll hear about today in terms of embedding audio and the different characteristics of these ebooks. You can always learn more about this too on our librarian webpage. Next slide, please. And finally, this is really kind of just to give context to today's discussion. This is part of a larger conversation that began years ago at Emory to really explore and understand the development of these new models of scholarship, so for long-form scholarship. And we've identified 3 types of long-form scholarship, and each author today will be representing one of these 3. And one being those that have a strong resemblance to print monographs, so moving from print to digital, and then others that are enhanced in some way by the digital format, things like having enhanced video or multimedia associated with the works. And also those that are probably most likely not going to be in print just because of the way that the data and the associated resources are produced together to kind of create a new digital experience in and of itself. So these are 3 typographies that we're offering today, and we'd like to explore those with the authors that are speaking.
And with that, we do have a poll question for the audience. If this, Linnell, is this the correct time to ask it?
Sure.
Yeah, okay, so we wanted to know, which type of long-form digital scholarship are you most encountering in your role? Published digitally with a strong resemblance to print monographs, published digitally that are substantially enhanced by the digital format, or published digitally that are not suitable for print publication, the three types that Linnell just went through. So we'll give a few moments here, let people chime in on what they're most encountering. So just select the one that you encounter most in your current role. Looks like most people are saying published digitally with a strong resemblance to print monographs so far. Just a few more moments. So a few votes are still coming in. And I think we'll finish with that, and I'll share the results. So it looks like we ended up with 73% said published digitally with a strong resemblance to print monographs.
That's interesting, though. Still a significant portion that, at least a portion that are not, right? So that's really, it's interesting. Thank you. All right, I think we can move to the next slide. And with that, I'd like to introduce our first author speaker, Keith Feldman. He is Associate Professor of Comparative Ethnic Studies at UC Berkeley, and he currently serves on the Executive Committee of the Berkeley Center for New Media, which is, he's an interdisciplinary cultural studies scholar, and his work examines the interface between race knowledge and the literary with a focus on the US, the so-called Middle East, and North Africa. And he is also the co-editor with his colleague, Abigail Ducosnik, of #identity, hashtagging race, gender, sexuality, and the nation, and is co-PI of Berkeley's Color of New Media Working Group. I'll also just quickly add that Professor Abigail Ducosnik sends her regrets for today's webinar. And with that, I'll turn it over to Keith.
All right, thanks so much, Linnell. And thanks, Leah, for hosting this. So I wanted to give you just a brief background about this, this working group and where this book came from. The Color of New Media Working Group here at Berkeley was founded in 2013 by Professor Ducosnik and a PhD student named Paige Johnson, who were asking themselves, is the color of new media presumptively white? That is there a kind of colorblind approach to the ways in which people are studying new media? And what would it mean to challenge that approach by thinking concretely and robustly about the ways in which race, gender, sexuality, nation, questions of disability, and other axes of social difference, how these were in fact central or at least quite important to how we think about new media. So in that regard, from jump, this group has been interested in inclusivity and accessibility. So when it came time for us to start thinking about what kind of publication we wanted to emerge out of the project, it became clear to us that we wanted a form of publication that was also inclusive and accessible, and that featured junior scholars, mostly graduate students at the time, from here at Berkeley. And so the book has ended up being 19 chapters, 14 single-authored chapters, mostly by graduate students, again, at the time, who are engaging with questions of social media in general and Twitter specifically in their scholarship. And because the book is itself asking questions about new media, we wanted it to be able to materialize in a form that could be shareable and could circulate widely through social media networks, right? That was important to us so that it could be accessible beyond the US context, beyond the European context, and could reach, ideally could reach users and makers who are not necessarily affiliated with scholarly institutions. Can we go to the next slide? Right, so we were deeply invested in finding ways to cultivate new audiences with a kind of digital dissemination. There is an initiative here at the University of California Library System called the Berkeley Research Impact Initiative, or BRII. And we reached out to BRII about halfway through the production process for the book to see whether they would support open access. And BRII was absolutely incredibly enthusiastic. They were a breeze to work with and partnered with Michigan to transfer a subvention from Berkeley to the press in order to cover some of the costs associated with the production of the book. The other thing I'd want to say here is that along with creating a monograph that's open access, we also wanted to make sure that this publication could circulate well for these junior scholars, many of whom this was their first or second scholarly publication. So we wanted the impact of this work not only to ideally circulate quite broadly, but to also be legible to search committees, to potential funders for proposals, and other sort of academic, more traditional academic and scholarly audiences. So we were really thrilled to be able to have a digital EPUB version of the book, along with the more traditional book between two covers, both a hardcover and a paperback version. Can we move to the next slide? Great. And one of the things that was also important to us was to try and decenter the United States in particular as the primary site of analysis for social media in general. And in doing that, we were excited to see that that identity's circulation and engagement could be tracked to a more global audience. We have chapters in the book that focus on social media activism in India, in Ghana, in Nigeria, a bit in Latin America. And we wanted to be able to see sort of where and how this kind of scholarship might get picked up in other sort of non-European and non-US sites. Okay, and can we move to the next slide? So for us, in terms of innovating a format for work on new media, it was really a delight to be able to pair the subject of this study, right, which is the ways in which social media is getting utilized for political activism and political imagination more broadly, to pair that with the form through which this scholarship could circulate. And in the process, to also ensure that, again, that these publications coming from first-time authors could be legible in any number of ways that they wanted to make this work legible, from social media networks all the way up to job search committees and the like. So I'll leave it there.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Keith. And then we'll turn to Professor Ann Ruggles Gear. And just a bit here, this now transitions us into our second form of typology, which is looking at how the digital monograph is paired with and associated with rich layers of research data and enhanced digital formats. So Professor Ann Gear is Arthur Thornell Professor and Gertrude Buck Collegiate Professor at the University of Michigan, where she directed the Sweetland Center for Writing for the past 11 years. And she currently serves as the chair of the Joint PhD program in English and Education. A former chair of CCC and a former president of NCTE, she was the 2018 president of the Modern Language Association. And she has written a dozen books and over 100 articles, and she currently is engaged in a large-scale project of integrating writing to learn into Gateway STEM courses. Turn it over to you, Professor.
Thank you, Linnell, and thanks again to Leah for making all this possible. I'd like to talk a little bit about the kind of the impetus of this book and the ways that this project, whoops, we switched slides quickly. Thank you. Let's stay here for a minute. One of the things that we really wanted to do with this book was to reach a very wide audience. I think it's no secret to any of you that we're in a moment in US culture, at least, which is highly anti-intellectual, where higher education is under question. The value of it is certainly contested. And it seemed to us that one way to address this is to offer some demonstration of the difference that higher education makes to students who proceed through an undergraduate curriculum and develop as writers. So that was the largest goal of this project. And therefore, we wanted to be able to reach a much wider audience than any monograph could possibly reach. So it was really the general public in one way. Certainly our colleagues who are scholars in writing studies, who are themselves concerned with teaching writing in undergraduate education, and researchers who would be interested in long-term studies. I should say that this is the first longitudinal study of this size and of this scope that has been published. There have been other longitudinal studies that have been of shorter duration or smaller populations, but this was really an innovative study, and so we wanted to make it available to the widest possible audience, including, of course, as was true for the previous speaker, international audiences, because there is a population of people who are teaching writing in English really across the world. And so we wanted to be able to reach all of those audiences. The other thing that was distinctive about this project was that it was highly collaborative. There are 10 authors, again, like the previous book's description, some of them who started out as graduate students, but because this project extended over a long period of time, they've gone on to their own careers. And again, we wanted to make their work visible. So they were among the collaborators. The undergraduates who were willing to share their work with us were certainly collaborators. We also worked very closely with Michigan Publishing, that is the press, and also with the Michigan Library. And that whole group gave us a very different way of looking at data and being able to present data to the world. Another feature that the digital gave us was that each author was able to present his and her own particular angle, because each author brought something different to the table. Some were much more focused on the rhetorical dimensions of writing, others on genre, others on really sentence level, particularly linguistically informed sentence level approaches to writing. Others were more interested in digital writing itself and the construction of e-portfolios, and still others were looking at the sort of longer scope of what students bring to college and what they take away. So by bringing together all of these different perspectives, one of the things we were able to do was include video interviews with each of the authors, who then were able to talk more about their particular perspective, and that adds another dimension to the data and the interpretation that we're able to offer. Let's move to the next slide, please. So another thing that this project made possible was, as the title suggests here, we were able to sort of move beyond a lot of the dichotomies, and certainly one dichotomy is the longstanding difference between the book in covers and the digital realm. And of course, this project is both. We have the book in its traditional form, and then we also have the much enhanced version on the Fulcrum platform that it uses many of the resources of digital publication. One of the other dichotomies that we wanted to address is a problem that's posed by having the amount of data that we have. As you can see on the screen here, we were working with 169 students whom we followed from the very first piece of writing they produced as they matriculated through their final projects as seniors graduating. And so we had a huge amount of data because each student participant gave us collections of writing for each year that they remained undergraduates. And then, of course, we also had the interviews, the surveys, the electronic portfolios, and then individual case studies of a number of students. And so having this amount of data presented a problem of how much do you show? Because in talking about this kind of project, there's the telling part. You know, we can say what we did and what we learned, but it seemed very important to us to be able to show at the same time. And this platform made it possible for us to do both, to do the showing and the telling. Another thing that's related to this is there's the phenomenon of too much information. And the beauty of the system here is that readers can choose. They don't have to be limited to any particular way of approaching this book or approaching the immense amount of data that it offers. The reader may skip over sections and say, I'm not really interested in that. And at the same time, they can also really dig in and look very closely, for example, at a single student or a single issue, and be able to pull the data and sort the data. We have some really fine-grained tools that enable readers to look at the material in multiple ways and in multiple combinations, which makes for a very different kind of, and I think much enhanced, reading experience. Next slide, please. Another thing that this project made possible is to offer full pictures. I think in most research projects you get samples of something, but here we're able to offer full pictures so that people can look at students from a variety of levels, listen to the interviews because we tape them and then transcribe them. You can read the transcription, or you can actually listen to the interview. You can move through that same student's electronic portfolio. You can compare it with other portfolios. You can look at many different aspects of the writing that students have done. You can look at it longitudinally from first year to last year. You can look at it thematically. You can look at it in terms of issues like genre, like language level. One of the things that we've included are the corpora that were created for the linguistic analysis of student writing, so that it's possible to use that same corpora and carry out additional projects. And in fact, that's one of the other aspects of collaboration that this project is making possible. It's because our data is being preserved and made available in its raw form as well as in its embedded form, embedded in discussions of the research. It's possible for other researchers to come and use this same material and carry out very different studies, because given the rich amount of material that we have, we obviously didn't plumb all of its possibilities. And so this represents really a new kind of research that's possible in the humanities. I think we all know that statisticians, for example, have been doing this kind of thing for a long time, sharing data sets and being able to do different kinds of research with the same body of data. It's highly unusual for humanities people to be able to do this, and this is something that this project is making possible. We're ready for the next slide. This slide makes clear what I was just saying. The flexibility and the sort of breadth that Fulcrum offers. The website is something that was designed to bring public audiences into engagement with what writing is. This goes back to the initial point that I was making about trying to make more visible to the general public, to the taxpayers, to the tuition payers, if you will, who are supporting higher education, for them to see in much more detailed terms what actually is happening with students as they move through their undergraduate years. And the website presents that in what we think of as a quite accessible way, but then also offers various kinds of entrees into the material provided by the ebook itself and the appended data. And then the Deep Blue system, which builds on what Fulcrum offers, is where all of the data is preserved so that people can, as I said earlier, be able to go in and use this material for entirely new research projects. And on to the next slide. I think as I look at this whole project, among the opportunities that this kind of publishing has made possible are, first of all, it has given a new definition to the word collaboration, because as I mentioned earlier, the multiple populations that were involved in this project and the possibility for ongoing collaboration, which is made possible by the fact that many other colleagues are going to be able to use this data. And I should say that it's also leading to a different kind of thinking in the field, so that at an upcoming meeting within a group of people in writing studies, one of the things that we're going to be looking at is creating a broader platform that would make it possible for those of us who have collected material like this project has to be able to have multiple sets of data accessible. It clearly, this project has also made possible much more attention to, and hopefully invitation to, new kinds of audiences that extend beyond the academic audience. And in so doing, has, I think, opened the door to new kinds of public engagement between the academy and the wider public. And that concludes my session.
Thank you so much. We appreciate your slides there. And we're moving on to When Digs Go Digital. And this begins our discussion around published long-form scholarship that is typically not suitable for print publication, and certainly is our last case study today. And I'd like to introduce to you Matthew Naglak. He's a PhD candidate in the Interdepartmental Program in Classical Art and Archaeology at the University of Michigan. And he is currently a visiting scholar at the American Academy in Rome and is a supervisor of topography and digital data at the Gabi Project excavations outside of Rome. Over to you, Matthew.
Wonderful. Thank you, Linnell, for the introduction, and thanks everyone for being here today. Just a bit about the impetus behind this monograph. Really, over the past decade or so, the field of archaeology has really come into the digital age. At this point, it's almost impossible to find a project which isn't taking advantage of digital tools and methodologies like 3D modeling and laser scanning, or collecting detailed spatial data for artifact locations, or using tablets in the field to enter in data real time into online databases. But each of these new types of technology have really created their own wealth of digital data in very many different varieties of forms. So the question then becomes, how do we present this data? All of these models and reconstructions that we've put a lot of time and effort into in an efficient and informative way. And most importantly, how can we tie this data effectively into the larger story of the ancient site being constructed? And we can go to the next slide. So about 5 years ago, the excavations taking place at this site of Gabi, just outside of Rome, were just one example of a project wrestling with these issues. The Gabi project is an international archaeological initiative led by Professor Nicola Terranato and the University of Michigan. At its core, its project's goals are both to better understand how cities like Rome developed in the first millennium BCE, as well as to kind of reevaluate what exactly a successful ancient urban environment was really like. So we got to this point about 5 years ago where we had lots of data and lots of ideas, and we knew we wanted to combine these together, but we weren't exactly sure of the best way to move forward. So it was around here we began working with Michigan Publishing and what will become the Fulcrum team to create a new kind of innovative online publication focused on a particular house on the site that had been built roughly 2,500 years ago. And this monograph is the first of what will hopefully be a series that plays the role of both a traditional archaeological narrative, while at the same time brings to the forefront all of this kind of really invaluable spatial 3D descriptive and quantitative data that has been collected over the past decade. Go to the next slide. So this is accomplished through the creation of a nonlinear publication, which offers the reader the freedom to explore the data in whatever way they choose. It became immediately apparent that a standard monograph publication was not going to work for this. There is the standard narrative text that you can see there on the left side of the screen, but this is complemented by interactive 3D models within a Unity gaming engine that allows the reader to walk through and see the site through our 3D models and reconstructions, along with gaining access to further detailed imagery and other information in our online database. So through this, readers are encouraged to kind of explore in a multimodal fashion, moving digitally through the 3D model, the 3D game, while they move through the text. And importantly, both these pathways, the text and the models, are linked, allowing the reader to move back and forth fluidly as they want. Hyperlinks within the text can move your 3D person to a specific place within the house to let you get a better look at what exactly it is you're reading about in the narrative. These hyperlinks also let you move between different thematic passages within the text itself, letting you dig down deeper into the details of the house's story. This really allows for a flexible narrative where a student in undergrad with a general interest might be able to get a quick overview of the project by reading just a few pages, or a specialist could quickly zoom in into the detailed information that they might want for their specialist study on pottery or statues or architecture. Further links both from within the text and within the model allow the reader to explore a digital database where all the nitty-gritty details of the excavation can be found, along with a myriad of image, table, and graph resources accessible from within the book. And these can be sorted and filtered to help researchers quickly find what they are looking for. So overall, it's really a totally new type of digital archaeological monograph. Instead of your text being in one place, maybe your 3D models being uploaded to a repository or Sketchfab, and your spatial data in a third place that you would have to go to, tying up multiple computer screens. This monograph really lets us become a one-stop shop, which can tie everything we have together for the ease of the users, for the readers. And go to the next slide, please. Well, with the second volume in our series coming out soon, we're excited to start including new features both inside and outside the model. One new exciting resource is going to be the addition of interactive maps built within the Leaflet JavaScript package. So scholars from a wide variety of fields in the arts and humanities are starting to use spatial data in their work in new and interesting ways. But when you're stuck with a static figure or a static map, you can only really make a single point. You know, the figure is cited in one place. It says see figure 0A or whatever within the larger narrative. So this kind of leaves the readers out of luck if they're interested in exploring the data in a more detailed way. This also only gives a single perspective of the data at hand, that of the author, without much room for enhanced or personalized interpretations by the reader. So interactive maps or interactive figures can begin to help solve these issues by really putting entire spatial databases in the palm of the reader's hand. For the reader, they allow for an enhanced interaction with the data, giving you the ability to turn on and off different data layers of interest, or zoom in to a particular feature of the text which sparks some interest, just like the hyperlinks in our first volume allowed you to zoom in on the 3D models of whatever you were reading about. These maps let you zoom in on the particular post hole, perhaps, as you can see many of them in this figure from the text. For the author, they really enhance the narrative by allowing us to include details which really wouldn't be feasible within the bounds of a standard figure or caption. Here on the right, for example, an entire database worth of information gives details on every single feature that was excavated within a single, ingrained map within the volume. Information that in the past would need to be located on an external resource or in a very, very long extended appendix. Next slide, please. So in closing, I just wanted to reflect a few of the ways this kind of publication has directly impacted how we're engaging with archaeology in the field. Really on a basic level, it lets us reevaluate how we dig, attempting to gather, preserve as much information as possible for both scholars and the general public is a primary goal of archaeology. Since once you dig it, it's not like a science experiment. The evidence is gone once you have dug it a single time. In the past, this would really mean lengthy amounts of time spent sketching and measuring walls and blocks by hand, or creating abstract drawings to attempt to show the relationships that you were seeing in the field. Now, though, with the ability to create and publish accessible 3D models in conjunction with our text, we're saving time and energy that we can put into thinking about larger questions about the history of the world. In a similar vein, the ability to tie all of our data together in one place, whether it's qualitative, quantitative, 3D, really opens the door to increased engagement with other scholars of archaeology in a way that wasn't previously possible. Although obviously not a replacement for the physical experience of digging a site, the publication of the 3D models allow us to re-excavate, as it were, turning off and on the models to recreate what the site was like at a particular moment in time, or even being able to see different models that were excavated years, decades apart from one another. When tied together with our database, which includes almost every thought the excavator had while digging, This really encourages scholars to come up with their own interpretations for what they are seeing, rather than taking our singular account as the full and final truth. We hope that this will lead to increased discussion and collaboration across the field of archaeology in all of its different forms, and we've already gotten some of that in the reviews of our first publication. And we're really excited to keep pushing the boundaries of what a digital archaeological publication can really be. I think that's about it.
Thank you very much, Matthew. And this is Leah again. Before we move on to the next presentation, we have another poll question for you. What aspects of long-form digital scholarship are of most concern to you? And this is multiple choice. You can mark more than one answer. So let us know which of these aspects are of most concern: pricing, preservation, discoverability, accessibility, usage, licensing, or other. And if you select other, we ask that you please let us know in the chat what that is. We'll give a few moments for that, for these votes to come in. It's kind of all over the place so far. This is interesting. I see a couple of others. If you don't mind, use the attendee chat and let us know what's on your mind there. All right, well, I'm going to give this a few more moments. There's still some votes coming in, and then we'll close it and I'll share the results with the group. Let's see here. Someone said the other answer was recovering publishing costs through sales and subsidies. Interesting. Thank you. Another comment, I didn't say other, but workflow is a big concern. Other, authors and editorial and layout effort burden for long form digital prep, syncing timelines with print. Okay, looks like the votes are slowing down here. So I'm going to close that poll and share the results. So the top answer was accessibility at 61%. Followed closely by discoverability at 59%. So you can see the layout there. And with that, I will turn it over to Linnell to introduce our next speaker. Thanks, everyone.
Yes, definitely. Thank you so much, everyone. This is a really good transition into hearing from Andre Rathemacher, and she is a librarian and professor. And she's the head of acquisitions at the University Libraries at the University of Rhode Island, where she administers the materials budget of over $5.1 million and is responsible for the purchase and licensing of library materials in all formats and the management of electronic resources. An advocate of open access and scholarly communication reform, she coordinates DRI librarians' support of collaborative open access initiatives. I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Linnell. And we can go to the opening slide for my section, please. So hello, everyone. At the most basic level, at the University of Rhode Island, we appreciate the fact that University of Michigan Press ebooks conform to best practices for acquisition of ebooks in academic libraries, such as the Charlotte Principles. So at URI, in most cases, we insist on perpetual ownership of ebooks. We're looking for a one-time purchase model and no ongoing fees. And we want ebooks with no DRM or digital rights management and no limits on simultaneous users. Fortunately, Michigan ebooks meet all of these criteria. We also like that the University of Michigan Press license with Lyrasis conforms to licensing best practices. So it allows for interlibrary loan, scholarly sharing, text mining, course reserves, and archiving. And also the license recognizes fair use. So both the Michigan Press purchase model and the license terms ensure that we can meet our researchers' needs as well as perform our important role as libraries in preserving the cultural record. Librarian viewers to this webinar will also appreciate the excellent MARC records that are provided for free by University of Michigan Press and the availability of KBART files. Further confirmation that Michigan follows best practices and supports library workflows. As you can see on the slide, Rhode Island bought the backlist and frontlist packages. And while we like the flexibility of being able to purchase individual ebook titles, for example, through Gobi, which Michigan doesn't yet have set up, it's true that purchasing ebooks in packages makes a lot of sense for us also, because with packages, the cost per book is much less than of purchasing books one by one. And also we have significant labor savings when we order, pay for, and make available ebooks in a batch. Next slide, please. I'll use this reflection section to emphasize the importance, from my library's perspective, of developing open source, community-based scholarly infrastructure. As many of you know, there are growing calls among librarians for us to redirect some of our materials budgets towards support of nonprofit and non-commercial infrastructure for scholarly research and its outputs. Depending on the library, that support can come as some combination of financial contributions to organizations like University of Michigan Press, or as in-house development. At URI, we take these calls seriously despite our limited funding and staff. So we've mostly focused on financial support, supporting a number of open access and open infrastructure initiatives. Some examples are Open Library of Humanities, Luminos, the DOAJ, and Reveal Digital. So part of purchasing ebooks from University of Michigan Press is not just providing top quality, cutting edge humanities research to our campus, which of course we'd want to do in any case, but it's also an investment in the Fulcrum platform. And so just to end, as librarians, we want to support digital scholarship as it evolves, and we hope to play a role in that evolution. And that means we want to support new forms of research outputs that are not constrained by the legacy of print format. And that does it for my section.
Thank you so much, Andre. I'm going to turn now to listening into the perspective of a publisher and also as an acquiring editor from the University of Michigan Press. We have Sarah Jo Cohen. She's a senior acquiring editor for American Studies at the University of Michigan Press. And she holds a PhD in English from the University of Minnesota and has worked as an editorial assistant at UNC Press and as the rights and contracts manager and then editor at Temple University of Press.
Great. Thank you, Linnell. Thank you, Leah, for hosting, and thanks to all the people who are listening for listening. Leah, I'm ready for the next slide. So I'm going to just give you some brief information about the press. We were founded in 1930 as part of U of M Library and have been part of U of M Library since 2009. We publish about 100 new books a year and have published about 5,000 plus titles to date. Some of our key strengths here are political science, performing arts, classics and archaeology, American studies, African studies, and Asian studies. And in addition to our more traditional scholarly publishing, we do English language teaching texts and have a small trade list mainly about the US Great Lakes region. And one of the exciting things about this press, and one of the things that drew me here, I think, is our commitment to digital scholarship, including open access. Next slide, please. In response to the reflection question, how do you see your role changing to support new types of work that these authors are creating? I wanted to just start by saying that I've been at Michigan for 9 months, and in that time I've been in conversation with people working on all 3 kinds of ebooks that Linnell introduced to you. So there's a lot of exciting work that's coming through here, and that's hopefully going to go get published and end up in the EBC soon. For me, one of the things that has been exciting is supporting authors' desire to enhance ebooks. And that means that I'm kind of working with them in different ways than I've worked with authors in the past. I think that what Professor Geer said about collaboration being important in her project is very true of my work. So I'm working with authors to find funding, which is something that Professor Feldman talked about and something that's important for open access publishing. And I'm also working with authors to help them figure out what kinds of resources will work in an enhanced ebook for both an editorial standpoint and a technical standpoint. One of the other ways that I'm collaborating differently with authors is rethinking what peer review looks like for different types of digital scholarship. For the kinds of projects like Gabby E, or right now I'm sending an album out for peer review. Our traditional peer review questions don't quite work, and so you have to work with authors and series editors in some cases to come up with questions that will help us to more effectively assess whether the project will work for our list and work in our platform. In terms of sort of bigger things that we are doing as a press, I'm happy to be behind the fact that we're simplifying the purchasing of ebooks and being able to provide folks like Andrea some of the things that she talked about in her presentation. We're going direct to the libraries. We have single license and business model. We have friendly access rules and an enriched user experience. It's exciting to be working on a platform that is built around our shared values as a publisher and the shared values of the larger publishing community. And it's also exciting to be sustaining an open source infrastructure. As Linnell said earlier, everything is available on GitHub. So that's all that I have, and I look forward to hearing people's questions. Thanks, Leah.
All right, well, this is Linnell speaking, and just to point people in directions, multiple directions, depending upon what interested you, you're more than welcome to contact the authors directly. We put email addresses there. They are welcome to receive your messages. We'd also like to offer you the opportunity to visit and learn more about the collection itself on the www.press.umich.edu/librarians. That's kind of the landing page that we have for the collection. You can, of course, explore the collection. The open access titles are on Fulcrum at www.fulcrum.org/Michigan. And if you are interested in learning more about actually getting the collection into your library, we also offer a link to Lyrasis page. Next slide. And these are the lovely faces behind the scenes working here at the Michigan Publishing. Myself and my colleague Emma DePasquale, she's an engagement manager working with libraries and outreach role. And of course, Teddy Gray is an outreach member at Lyrasis and would love to hear from you as well. And with that, I'll turn it back to Lee.
Right. Well, thank you very much, Linnell, and to all of our panelists. I know our attendees, we're running short on time here. We were supposed to finish in about an hour, but if you are able to stick around and do Q&A, we would welcome your questions at this time. You can send them using the Q&A button or the attendee chat. Otherwise, if you have questions and you do need to leave, we do have the email addresses there for follow-up. And we'll be able to, we'll post a recording of this session along with the slides on the Charleston Conference website shortly. So there's a multitude of ways that you can get in touch to follow up with questions. But we actually have a question for you before we address audience questions. This is an open-ended question that we would like your input using the attendee chat. We're curious, what steps will you take given what you've learned today? So if you take the information that was presented here today, just give us a brief, some input there on what you will do with it. What steps will you take given what you learned here today? And we would welcome your feedback on that, as well as any questions you may have for our presenters at this time. Linnell, while people are giving their, thinking about their comments and questions, do you have anything that you'd like to follow up on? Any questions for the presenters or material that didn't get covered that you'd like to touch on here?
No, I think we're set. I don't want to pull people over the hour. I know how folks have dedicated so much time to be with us today. So I'm just grateful that we have at least 40 people hanging out still. And so just love to get your feedback on the last question and wrap up. And if there are any questions, we'd love to answer those.
Great. So we did have a couple of comments that are coming in now. One says, we are extremely small academic library, so I'll reach out to our consortial members to see what we might do. So that's in response to our question, what steps will you take given what you've learned today? A comment from Lene, librarians can increase awareness of these alternate forms of scholarship via social media and in consultations. I like that, thank you.
Yeah, definitely.
Any other comments or questions? If not, then I will close and thank everyone again. Linnell, Keith, Anne, Matthew, Andre, and Sarah Jo. Thank you so much for all of your hard work that went into this webinar today. Thank you for your presentations. It was fascinating and I learned a lot, and I appreciate all of your participation. So thank you to our audience as well. I will close with this, and you'll receive an email with a link for the video and the slides once they're available. So, thank you very much and have a great day. We'll see you back at the next Charleston Conference webinar. Bye, everyone.